Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Water Infrastructure for Tomorrow webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to all attendees later next week. For those of you who are not familiar with the GoToWebinar platform, you should see a control panel to the top right of your screen. There's an orange arrow to the left of that panel, which will minimize the entire box. All participants have been muted for this webinar, but we encourage you to ask questions by typing them into the question box on the control panel. We will hold a Q&A near the end of the webinar, so please feel free to type your questions as you think of them throughout the presentation. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Jayla Poppleton, Executive Director at Water Education Colorado.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Courtney, and welcome everyone. We are so glad to have you here and to be able to gather and host educational events like this, even during these times of continued social distancing. Based on our registration list, we have people tuning in from all corners of the state. We've got a big contingent from Arvada and Firestone, people from as far as Mancos and Del Norte, Aspen, but also a few folks that I want to acknowledge who, with the current severe wildfire situations, are coming from Tabernash and Fraser, Boulder, Fort Collins, Northern Water. And just to acknowledge that, given those conditions, our topic today may not be taking as high a precedence as it might normally. So our thoughts are with you, most especially for your safety, but also for the protection of your water systems. Webinars like this have been part of Water Education Colorado's programming for many years and are just one of the opportunities that we offer in service of our mission, which is to ensure that Coloradans are informed on water issues and equipped to make decisions that guide our state to a sustainable water future. In addition to webinars, our programs include publications, water news reporting, educational tours and workshops, as well as leadership training. And if you haven't engaged with us through one of those avenues in the past, we encourage you to check it out. We regularly work with a wide variety of partners from around the state, and we're thrilled to be here today co-hosting this webinar on a very important and timely topic with both the Colorado Municipal League and the Special District Association of Colorado. For WEco, our focus on aging infrastructure right now is tied to our summer issue of Headwaters magazine. We try to organize a webinar or two to take each issue off the page and into the world where there's an opportunity to ask our panelists questions and dive deeper into the subject matter. So that's what we're doing today. And if you're just starting to delve into the issue of water infrastructure, please check out that summer edition of Headwaters, which is available on our website. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce one of our co-hosts, Ann Terry, who's the Executive Director of the Special Districts Association of Colorado. And Ann and SDA have been great partners of WEco's. In the past, we've worked on numerous programs together, most significantly our water fluency program. SDA regularly supports WEco, both through sponsorship support and the sharing of expertise. And so I know some of you today are also members of this great organization, and Ann, I'd love to give you the opportunity to share a few words with our guests.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us. Looking at the attendee list, we have a lot of members that are joining us, and that's great. And what I think is really cool about our partnership and collaboration is that we are also able to have crossover with our members and CML, and then sometimes some of the folks from the counties, so that they get to know each other in the water fluency, in the other events, the webinars. Whenever we're going to get back together again in person, they'll have those opportunities as well. But you guys run an amazing organization, and if you haven't delved into aging infrastructure, you will find that our infrastructure is extremely old, and that's around the whole country. And it's something that we've been working with CML and talking to our congressional delegation over the last 10 years, as well as our local policymakers, such as the senators and legislators representative at the legislature. So this is a really important topic, and while some people say, oh, this is kind of boring because it's just concrete and plans and all that kind of stuff, it is actually the backbone, literally and figuratively, of our country. So it's super important to be able to know what it is, advocate for the changes and the improvements, and it's an amazing opportunity for us to all work together, because that's how we're going to get stuff done. And we're excited to be your partner, excited to be in the local government family with CML. They're an excellent partner, and really enjoy the opportunities that all of your publications provide. We like to be able to give those out to our members as well. They're just so informative. So thank you very much for having me, and I hope you all, if you have not taken a look at the water fluency, look at it for next year. It's an amazing course. So thanks, guys.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Anne. That collaboration really is key. And so I'd like to introduce our second partner today, the Colorado Municipal League. You heard from Courtney, who kicked things off with the tech update. She's running the webinar behind the scenes. And then we also have Heather Stauffer, who is the legislative and policy advocate for CML. And they are another valuable partner dedicated to providing educational opportunities for their members. So really glad to be here with them today. Heather, will you share a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jayla. And I would just echo what Anne mentioned. Water Education Colorado is an amazing resource for all of our members and for all things water. And water infrastructure is something that most municipalities, I think, are thinking about constantly. And because of that, it's something that we're really focused on and we care very deeply about at CML. And not only the question of how do towns and cities afford to phase out old infrastructure and build new infrastructure, which is very important, but also how can we design that infrastructure to be smart and efficient and anticipate the needs of our communities for the next 20 to 50 years. So that's something we're thinking a lot about. And I'm really excited to hear from our expert panelists on some exciting things that they're working on. So thanks again to Water Education Colorado and definitely our partners at SDA for helping to put this on.
Perfect, thank you, Heather. All right, well, we are so glad to have the opportunity to work with partners like you both and really appreciate everything that you do to advance understanding of water for your members. And now it's time to really get started. So I'm going to turn things over to Caitlin Coleman, who is the editor of Headwaters Magazine and the moderator for today's webinar. So she's going to dive into our topic and introduce our speakers.
Yeah, thanks, Jayla and everyone. You know, I'm also excited to get started, but as you guys know, today we're talking about the future of water infrastructure, but part of that is rooted in the present. In the summer issue of Headwaters Magazine, which focused on aging infrastructure, we reported that the American Society of Civil Engineers graded Colorado's drinking water infrastructure at a C-, which isn't great. They estimated that it will take $10.2 billion over the next 20 years to maintain and upgrade the state's drinking water infrastructure, and another $4.7 billion for wastewater. So between age and maintenance, it can be hard to keep up and pay for repairs and replacement while also planning for future water supply needs, infrastructure expansion, treatment to protect public health and meet water quality regulations, and everything else. There's a lot to think about, but today we're focusing on the opportunity in that. The needs of today and the things that we're asking infrastructure to do are different than they were 20, 50, or 100 years ago. And as we look at repairing and replacing so much infrastructure, this could be a moment to do so in a smarter, more effective, and intentional way. Our speakers today are all doing that, moving us toward the future of municipal water infrastructure. We'll hear from three wonderful experts. First, Sarah Dominick with Hazen and Sawyer, who will talk about sustainable infrastructure and what it means to be an Envision sustainability professional. Then we'll hear from Kaler with the City of Westminster, who's been spearheading some interesting data-focused work that began with an inventory of the city's water infrastructure system. Then finally, we'll shift gears to hear from Tim York, the Water Conservation Manager with Aurora Water. Tim will take us down to a more localized scale and talk with us about Aurora's conservation programs, which he doesn't classify in this way, but we've heard folks with the Water Now Alliance talk about the idea of distributed infrastructure, considering all elements of a water system, not just the reservoirs or treatment plants, but also fixtures, sprinkler systems, and lawns themselves. So let's get started with Sarah Dominick.
Thanks, Caitlin. I am going to show my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So today I'm going to talk about sustainable infrastructure and the Envision Framework. And first, I want to spend a moment on defining sustainability. But it's pretty difficult to define because it means something different for everybody. The EPA has stated that sustainability is to create and maintain conditions under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony to support present and future generations. And as you look at the wheel that I have, or the Venn diagram of sustainability, you can see that it highlights the triple bottom line. So focusing on community, the environment, and the ecology. And you can see that you only really achieve sustainability when you hit all three of those. Some of the concerns that fall underneath sustainability are the water resource availability, extreme weather events, which we have seen droughts, fires, and floods, sometimes all in the same year. If you think about 2013, aging workforce, or the brain drain, to use a water pun there. So thinking about your individual employees and how well they are able to pass down information and continue the good work that they do to future generations. There's also sustainability concerns with energy efficiency and carbon emissions, and how those emissions affect the long-term changing climate that we've seen. And then we've got some more socially focused pieces of sustainability with the economy and population dynamics, with social equity and engagement of the community. Something that we've just heard from our sponsors here today, the infrastructure, age and reliability. And then if you live on the coast, there's a lot of concern about storm surge and sea level rise. So all of these different concerns affect different utilities, and it's hard to measure them and quantify them in one metric. So the question is, how do we really measure sustainability? How do you know that what you're doing is creating a sustainable project? And there have been some good frameworks that have been put out. The first and probably the most famous framework for sustainability is LEED certification. And LEED certification is really good for buildings. So if you're looking at an administrative building or an office building, it's a really good tool to use. But it really has challenges when you look at building a piece of pipeline. A piece of pipeline is not an occupied building, and a lot of the LEED metrics focus on those occupied spaces. It's also very prescriptive. You have to, follow the different check boxes perfectly to get the points needed to get LEED certification. So it's really challenging when you're thinking about something like a pipeline. How would you get a certification for that? Or a pump station. It doesn't really work. If you don't have a bathroom, you can't get any points for bathroom fixtures. So a new tool was created, and it was founded or created this by the American Public Works Association, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the American Council of Engineering Companies. They got their best brains together to think about sustainability and came up with a new framework that's called the Envision Framework. And it's hosted by the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure and the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. So the Envision Framework really focuses on 5 main components, and they each speak to different parts of the sustainability wheel. The first one is quality of life, where you're really looking at the well-being of the community engagement, and how people access the site. So not maybe as applicable for a pipeline, but a pump station. How do your workers get to the site? Are there safe sidewalks around the infrastructure? Is it well lit? So those are some of the items that fall under that quality of life metric. There's also one for leadership. So how are you contributing to your local economy? How are you working with different stakeholders in the area nearby? Maybe it's neighbors. And then are you planning for the long range and really thinking about how your infrastructure can adapt over time? I look frozen. All right. Can you still hear me?
We can still hear you, but you are frozen.
Okay. Well, that's okay. We'll just be frozen for a little while. The next one is really resource allocation, which focuses on the materials that you use in planning your project. Maybe you can recycle the materials. Maybe you can use renewable energy or install solar panels on your site. And how are you able to conserve water or use less water in your building and landscapes? For the natural world, it focuses on siting concerns, where you can look at not disturbing any previously pristine lands. So, you know, it's better to build things where we have already disturbed the land. And then also things like conservation of wetlands and maintaining the ecology. And then finally, there's a category for the emissions and resilience of your project. And that is a holistic view of how your project is able to adapt to a changing climate. All right, I'm trying to put my camera back on here. All right, so Envision is really a useful tool because it is highly applicable to civil infrastructure, so you don't have to worry about trying to get the square peg in the round hole. Anyone can use it at any point of a project, so you can start applying the Envision framework in pre-design or anywhere along the way. It is easiest to and probably the best to start it when you're starting the project, but it is something that you can pick up even if you haven't started from the very beginning. It's also applicable to multi-sectors, and it assesses the full framework of sustainability. So it has that social, environmental, and economic considerations, or the triple bottom line, in addition to resiliency. And it's a consistent approach that you can show measurable progress towards, and something that you can share with the public about how you are being sustainable. The majority of Envision projects who have been that have been verified and received a verification or a rating from ISI are actually water projects. So that's a pretty cool thing. And Julie in the next presentation is going to talk about how Westminster has been applying the Envision framework. So we've got some good projects to go by if you're looking at applying Envision to your project. Some of the system components for the Envision framework are to become an ENVSP, which is an Envision certified professional. In order to do that, you take some training and a test and really learn more about how to apply Envision and what sorts of projects and project pieces can allow for verification or rating of your project. There's a guidance manual along with that, and a pre-assessment checklist, and then an online score sheet. So each of those components can be utilized to have this third-party verification, where you engage someone that's outside of your project to look and confirm that you have achieved all of the points needed to get that project certification, which is verified silver, gold, or platinum. Kind of similar to the LEED structure, but in a format that is a little bit more applicable to aging infrastructure replacements and water projects in general. So some of the benefits of using Envision are that it really takes sustainability initiatives into action. So you are applying your sustainability goals on projects. It's consistent and transparent, so it's something that you can easily share with boards, councils, or the public. It allows you to benchmark your performance and track your results, which is great. And it really does strengthen the overall planning and design process. So you can really start incorporating those long-range aspects of being prepared for whatever the future might hold. And a lot of utilities have found that it does help increase collaboration and communication between their different departments. And so another key piece of this community outreach associated with Envision is that it really helps you have meaningful public involvement and buy-in. And this can be especially helpful for controversial projects. So it allows people to interact with your project, and you get a lot of recognition for the work that you're doing with the community members. So broadening it back out from a vision, there are a number of key sustainability planning best practices. So one of those is to really consider the long-term needs of your community, and maybe question that bigger is always better mindset. And you know, I spent a dozen years working at Denver Water, and it was really easy to replace pipes just a little bit bigger when you had everything dug up. And there are unintended consequences to just going bigger every time, especially when you're looking at water infrastructure and we're seeing a decrease in demands. It also is a good idea to incorporate flexibility into your project and your infrastructure. And what I mean by that is, you know, sometimes we are building new infrastructure or repairing existing infrastructure, and maybe you have a new permit limit at a wastewater treatment plant. It's always a good idea to think about not only the new limits that you're working towards for this project, but how your project might adapt to the next permit limits that are coming out or to other changing conditions. Another key sustainability best practice is to think about how your project might allow you to work with others. And an example of this would be the WISE project that is a collaboration between Aurora Water, Denver Water, and our partners in the South Metro area, where, you know, a broad group of stakeholders got together to build a project that the individual stakeholders would not have seen as much benefit from. And that project allows Denver and Aurora Water to lease their their reusable supplies to the South Metro area when they're not using it. So it really is a win-win for everyone. And finally, it's a good idea to consider how your project can go beyond sustainable to regenerative. And what I mean by that is, you know, restoring riparian areas or doing other things that would allow your project to actually be a benefit to the environment instead of just an impact on the environment. Thank you. And at this point, I'm going to introduce Julie Kaler from Westminster. And I think that you'll find that Westminster and Julie's team have done an excellent job of thinking about sustainability and using some of the keys from the Envision Framework. So here's Julie.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. I hope you can see the screen. Correct?
We can see your screen, but we're getting a very bad echo.
All right, I'm going to start, and hopefully that'll clear up. Hello, everyone. Julie Kaler, City of Westminster. Today, I'd like to talk with you about how we do long-term planning as a bridge to sustainable infrastructure for our city. And Sarah, thank you. I am an ENVSP, and I'm really thrilled to let you all know that Westminster received its first award. It's at our Big Dry Creek wastewater treatment facility for a solids dewatering project. And with that, I'll jump into my topic for today. In 2010, Utilities Engineering initiated long-term planning for capital improvements projects. And since then, we have completed several cycles, improving our process each time with respect to data collection, information sharing, discussion, timing particularly with respect to rate and fee discussions and budgeting. We're currently conducting long-term planning for the 2023 cycle. It's about a year-long effort, and it's probably 2,000 hours of effort with colleagues from all over Public Works. Now, in the early years, I understand there were some questions raised about the time commitment for inventory and meetings, and even some tensions surrounding putting out all the assets and having a very transparent capital improvements project approach. But I've been with the city 7 years now, and I think over this time, the pipeline people and the pump station, the wastewater, we can all see that when our assets are organized and registered, everyone can see where they are in the priority. And we have experienced that if your project is not funded this year, it's on the schedule for the next year or upcoming years. The asset database is really the core of our long-term planning process. This is simply an Excel spreadsheet. We have about 2,600 lines representing 15 different utility areas. We track assets with a $20,000 value or greater. This is a designation. An operating budget could probably absorb a $20,000 hit that they weren't planning on. But greater than that, it's probably better to think of it as an asset. The columns in the spreadsheet, we track when an item, well, the name of the item, obviously, when it was installed, when there was a significant repair, the original useful life based on industry standards, stretched useful life based on excellent operations and maintenance, calculated replacement year, and remaining useful life of the asset. We also track the cost of the item, including repair and/or replacement. And then we tack in engineering and contractor costs to provide kind of an all-in aspect. If this asset goes to a CIP, we want to know the total cost of taking care of it. And then finally, we track criticality, vulnerability, and risk of the asset. Criticality speaks to public health and safety, the effect on operations, degree of environmental harm and cost. And vulnerability is a measurement of age. Something that's at the end of its useful life is considered most likely going to fail within the next couple of years. And then when you multiply those two, criticality and vulnerability, we get risk. So very math, very data driven. But this is the core of our long-term planning. I mentioned 15 utility areas. I want to show you this pie chart. It's really interesting to me because it represents our utility areas in size in terms of dollar value. So we talk about our utility as a $4 billion utility. If we had to replace it all today, $4 billion. The four largest utility areas represent 86% of the $4 billion. So water pipelines, sewer pipelines, water supply portfolio, and the raw water system. The 11 remaining utility areas represent the remaining 14%. This includes reclaimed pipeline, meters, pumping stations, 4 different treatment facilities, water quality labs, and our communication systems. So I've talked about the data. The data is the data. We use it to generate lists. So the information, when we start to sort the asset database, ultimately it leads to this, our minimally responsible CIP, which is how we term our highest of highest priorities. So in the figure from the asset database, our list of assets, we developed the unconstrained model. This is a list of assets that are at the end of their useful life based on industry standards. It is very date driven, mostly age and condition. When we look at the total cost on this unconstrained model, it's usually hundreds of millions in any given year. Sometimes we say, if money grew on trees, that's what the unconstrained model looks like. But money doesn't grow on trees. So we take another look at this unconstrained model and we sort it again into the constrained model. This is a list where we take a hard look at level of service. Level of service is a series of goals that represent the degree of reliability that we desire for all of our utility assets. And inputs to that, it's another little rabbit hole, but hang with me. Customer expectations, regulations, and available resources. So all that goes into level of service. In the constrained model, we bring in criticality, vulnerability, and risk. So we have hundreds of items that are age-driven, but how important are they? What's the cost? If they fail, do we harm the public health and safety? That's what criticality, vulnerability, and risk does to us in the constrained model. Helps us to prioritize assets even further. We group them into projects. This is very budget focused, and so my group continues and enhances our talks with our business operations division to come up with our minimally responsible CIP. In the city's budget cycle, which is based on 2 years, we develop 2 years worth of very real projects. We project out 3 additional years, 5 years of projects. This year in our 2023-2024 cycle, I'd like to go 10 years or longer. The city's anticipated build out is 2040. Having real projects in the out years helps us so much with our financial model. It just makes it more robust. But I'll be honest that defining projects in the 10 to 20 year time frame is challenging for a variety of reasons. Rates and fees can change, leadership can change, and internal priorities can change. Nevertheless, trying to define real projects benefits the utility. So we have many inputs that go into arriving at the capital improvements project portfolio. I'd like to acknowledge that in my role as utilities engineering manager, it's to keep track of the utilities assets and to use the data to advocate taking care of what we own, which is the theme for our current 23-24 long-term planning effort. Once these projects are identified, another job in our group is to implement and manage the capital improvements projects. I fully acknowledge that there is more to the overall process of establishing a robust CIP program than just the data. The setting of rates and fees is integral. And I'll be honest, we raised rates and fees and we're on a current path to take care of what we own. And we've gotten pushback from ratepayers. I'm extremely aware of our current financial situation in the city and in our community. And this whole rates and fees, they speak to the affordability of the entire capital improvements project plan. But this rates and fees aspect really, it reminds us to stay in touch with our ratepayers. Another part of developing a capital improvements project plan is our city council priorities. They bring in policy issues, economic considerations, and yes, they bring in politics. The role of our city leadership, our council, our city manager, and our deputies, all of these groups and individuals have a voice in the capital improvements project. I'm just lumping them into this general bubble of city council priorities, but I think we can agree that each of these bubbles could have their own webinar. I'm going to push on with the data and staying focused on one of my primary jobs. And I'll conclude with my last slide by talking about how this data-driven method has a lot of benefits for the utility. Our proposed CIP plan informs our rates. We work with our business operations group and their financial model to advocate for rates that support the minimally responsible CIP. Our database puts infrastructure on a schedule for repair or replacement. I mentioned the city's 2-year budget cycle showing 5 years of capital improvements projects and how I would like to work on the out years out to 2040. And all the 15 utility areas are represented. I'd like to say that the database helps plan for future water quality regulations because we track the progress of regulations and we stay on top of if new infrastructure will be needed to be able to stay in compliance. And finally, our database increases the accuracy of our cost estimates by including the all-in kinds of cost in the database. We find that when we're formulating information for the financial model or taking a project to City Council for approval, the database keeps us up to speed on inflation or market trends. And we have, like I said, improved accuracy of cost estimates. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to turn this over to Tim.
There we go. I was muted. How many times have we said that in the last few months? Thanks for having me. As Caitlin mentioned, we're going to take a little bit of a turn here and talk about more of the site level. So we're not necessarily impacting large infrastructure, but as Julie just mentioned, a lot of the things that we're going to talk about do impact rates and fees and deal with some political input from council. So I'm going to talk about the site level and development level and what we're doing in Aurora to make sure that new development is being done in a sustainable and efficient method. So just a little background for those of you that aren't from the Front Range, we're the 3rd largest water utility in the state. Population just over 380,000 and growing at about 2% annually. So we are growing fast. About 160 square mile service area. We're actually up to about 90,000 connections now, and over 90% of those are residential. So we have a very high customer base that is residential accounts, and we can store about 3 years worth of water. So as we talk about our continued growth, there's a lot of things that we're trying to do to make sure we can meet those demands in the future. Dealing with new development is definitely one of the things that we have to do as we continue to grow. We look back to early 2000 and our distribution since then, we've done a good job. Our residents have done a great job. You can see the decline from 2000 down to about 2003. And we've since then, even though we've been continuing to increase in population, our demands have been below those numbers. But if you were to draw a trend line from 2003 to now, there's still an increase. So we are increasing overall demand with the increase in population. It's just at a slower rate. But we still understand that as we continue to grow and grow, you can only be so efficient, right? You can only use, so little water with new development, and eventually that's going to continue to grow, and we have to plan for that. Not only is our population expanding, but our city's expanding as well. The map on the left is the 2000 city limits, with the small purple area being what was original Aurora. The map on the right, you can start to see development expansion or city expansion right here, kind of central east, down in the southeast portion, and even up in the north. So not only are we growing within our current boundaries, but our boundaries are continuing to expand, and more development is going to take place in those areas as well. So if we start looking at how we've tried to impact new development, we can go all the way back to 2005, which is when our first ordinance on the conservation side of things really started dealing with new development. This one isn't very sexy, but the irrigation plans review process has been around since then. The idea was to have new developments, non-single family residential stuff, so anything that is commercial, multifamily, or common space in a single family development community, they have to design their irrigation system so at the very least they're starting off with something that sets them up to succeed. So the plan review process, we're looking at hydraulic integrity. Do they meet our ordinance for components, head layout, how efficient is it going to be? The biggest thing to really look at is the amount of change in projects that we've done. So 2013 is when I started. I actually started at Aurora Water as the irrigation plans reviewer. I started tracking then how many projects we were doing per year. If we look between 2013 and 2019, we see a over 300% increase in total sheets reviewed. What we're starting to see is bigger projects. So the new developments are getting larger, more sheets, so that the projects are becoming a part of the more sheets is how we've increased the requirements. But we're seeing larger projects and more projects every year since 2013. 2020 is on pace to be about the same as 2019. So we're continuing to see high rates of development. To go along with the irrigation plans review process for non-single family residential, we also do inspections on those. So not only are we requiring that they design efficient irrigation systems, we're also out in the field inspecting those and make sure that they're put in per the plans. Although we don't require irrigation plans for single family residential, which we'd like to, but we just don't have the staff capacity to do that. We do inspections for those to make sure that they at least meet the ordinance in relation to what components are required and their soil amendment requirements as well. These numbers on this chart are the amount of inspections we've done per year going back to 2008. So we've seen a big increase since 2015 as residential development continued to ramp up. 2019, a small dip. 2020 is going to be right around the same. But again, we're still seeing a high rate of development, and I think we're going to see that in the future. More new, so what happened in 2015 was there was a change in our fee structure for service connection fees or tap fees. And it changed the amount of fee mostly on the outdoor side. So for each home, the fee went down, but the fee went up substantially for irrigated areas that are on irrigation meters. And so the developers came to us and they wanted to have some conversations about how do we work together to develop a program that incentivizes water-wise landscapes or low water use landscapes and allows them to save some capital fees as well. So this has been a pretty successful program. And what it does is it allows development of native grass areas, or there's also a list of native plant species they can use. So where they don't pay anything for their service connection fee for those areas. We call it the Z-zone tap fee for irrigation meters. Originally, they had to put in a separate meter and it was pulled after 3 years, but we made a modification in 2016 that works a little bit better. So when a developer comes in with a landscape plan or irrigation plan, by the time it gets to us, they can designate native grass areas as Z-zone. For those areas, they will pay $0 per square foot for their tap fee, as opposed to just over $3 per square foot for what we call our non-water conserving, which would be your cool season turf, and right around $2 per square foot for your water conserving, which is all your trees and shrubs. For the Z-zone, they pay $0 per square foot up front, but they are bound by an agreement that gets recorded against the property with the county. And what the agreement says is they agree to a specific allocation for 3 years, which gives them enough water to establish all of their landscape. After 3 years, that allocation is reduced by the volume of water that was allocated for those Z-zone areas. So they didn't pay they didn't pay a service connection fee for it. They lose that allocation after 3 years, and if they exceed their allocation, it's a pretty heavy penalty. If they exceed in the first 6 months of the year, they pay about triple their rate for the remainder of the year. If they exceed in the second half of the year, they pay about double their rate for the remainder of the year. So it's really been adopted well by the development community. Again, it gives them a way to save capital fees up front. It gives us a way to have less bluegrass in our landscapes. I have a chart on the next page that will kind of show that a little bit better. Where we're at now, we just propose to have the same capital recovery fee and service connection fee agreements. So those agreements that get recorded with the property for all irrigation meters. So kind of another way to push some more conservation and efficiency into development. Currently, there's about 54 total projects in the program, about 146.5 or so million gallons saved per year is the projection. The thing to note if you look at this chart is if we look at pre-Z-zone, so before 2015 versus the Z-zone projects, percent of non-water conserving, so the percentage of turf has gone from about 48% down to less than 10%. So the Z-zone projects have really changed the type of landscape that's going into our community, which is good. It should start changing the archetype to a point where more developers want to do it regardless of the savings. We have another project, which is the WaterWise front yard tap fee, which gives a $1,000 credit to single family residential if they do a WaterWise landscape with no turf. I'll talk a little bit how we changed code here recently, and so that's going to kind of go away because we won't need it anymore. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this. This is our old ordinance. This is the landscape ordinance. These are the tables 14.3 A and B. The biggest thing to note here is before we started working with planning on the new universal unified development ordinance, we gave turf maximum and minimums in this chart here. And over here, we had a xeric option, so a xeric or WaterWise front yard option. But as we talked to developers, every one of them said that they never knew about it. They all thought that because we had this turf option and it has these minimums of turf that you have to put in, that no matter what they did, they had to put in that minimum amount of turf. So we kind of took a step back and asked ourselves why that is, why weren't we communicating that better, and how could we change that in future landscape code to make sure that they understood what was available and to start to kind of push the threshold of what could be done. So the new universal development ordinance, what we're able to do is change how turf is allotted for single family residential homes. You'll notice that there's a minimum 400 square feet. You may say, well, why do you have a minimum? There's only a minimum if they select the turf option. If they use the WaterWise option, so zero turf in their front yard, there's obviously no requirement. If they do want turf, we want a minimum of 400 square feet, and we want it to be contiguous, so that's a space large enough to actually be used. These 10 by 10 or 25 square foot pieces of turf in the front yards are not usable turf, and that's really what we want to get out. We're not about getting rid of all turf in the city. We just want to make sure that it's all usable space. So our conservation goals for working with planning during the new UDO development was to eliminate turf between the sidewalk and curb. I've never seen two kids out there playing soccer or football or hitting a baseball out on what used to be called a tree lawn. We've actually changed that now to curbside landscape. There's no reason to have turf in there. And reduce the number of front yards that we're allowed to have turf as well. To do that, in the new UDO, this blue area that you see highlighted must be greater than 1,000 square feet to be able to meet the minimum 400 square feet of turf requirement. Again, that has to be contiguous. So theoretically, you could only have it in this side of the yard if you're going to have it. We're looking at future changes to separate the front yard from the curbside landscape in this 1,000 square foot calculation. That'll make a little bit more sense when I show you another chart, and that'll actually limit it a little bit further. So when we looked at average lot sizes that were built, or average landscapes for front yard lot sizes that were built, we'd see about a 5,140 gallon per square foot or per lot savings per year under the new UDO. So that's pretty exciting for us. When we look at the curbside landscape, which used to be called the tree lawn, that area now has to be 10 feet wide. And when I say wide, I mean from the curb to the sidewalk or greater to allow turf. And it still has to have 400 contiguous square feet minimum, which pretty much eliminates turf from most curbside landscape areas for all new development within the city. There's very few that meet that 10-foot requirement. So we should start to see, as new developments come in, again, a change in the archetype of what's being put in Aurora. It won't just be a one-off anymore because somebody wanted to change it. We'll really start to change the look and create landscapes that make sense for our semi-arid climate. In this case, it's about 2,740 gallons per lot per year on average. Common curbside landscape. So in these cases, these do apply to the residential side as well, but these are all of the curbside landscapes in the common space. So they're either managed by the HOA or the Metro District. You used to be able to have turf in them regardless. So if they were any width, you could have, and I know you guys have all seen it, especially if you've been through Aurora, miles and miles and miles and miles of turf and tree lawn areas that nobody's ever stepped foot on other than to fix a sprinkler or to mow. And so in the new UDO, if it's 0 to 3 feet, there's no planting material at all. 3 to 6 feet, they're allowed to have shrubs, but no turf. 6 to 10 feet, they're allowed to have shrubs and native grasses. Again, no turf or no cool season turf. These are the savings just per linear foot. So, multiply that by miles. These changes have the ability to have, big impact on water that's being used in areas that are purely aesthetic. They're not active areas. They're not being used as active spaces. And again, we can start to change the look of the city, especially in those areas where we're growing, to be something that we really want it to be, to represent how precious water is here in Aurora. Little kind of sample neighborhood and the impacts. This is a neighborhood that was already built. 205 lots, average street front width of 60 feet, curbside landscape area of 8 feet, which eliminates the turf and all of the curbside landscapes there. We'd have a total of about 1.5, 1.4 million gallons per year saved. So I know it doesn't sound like a lot if we were to think about all of the water that we distribute in Aurora annually. But as we continue to grow, this is, has the ability to keep adding up and adding up and adding up. And we're not just saving water. Again, we're changing, the way that we're developing so that it's, representative of what it should be for our region. And that is it for me.
Okay, so I think we have some time for questions. As a reminder, you can type your questions into the question box on your panel on the right-hand side. It doesn't look like we have questions right now, but I actually have a question for Tim. So I'm curious to know kind of what the response from your residents have been to these conservation efforts, and if you guys are doing any kind of communication to them.
So most of the new stuff is really new. So the new UDO was adopted in September. And so we're just now starting to see new developments that are coming through the development process. So we don't really have any communities yet that have gone through the development process that have kind of been forced to do this. But we have seen those through, I kind of mentioned briefly, the front yard zero tap fee credit. So that was kind of the voluntary way that a developer could say, we're going to put in these water-wise landscapes in the front yards, no turf, and we give them $1,000 back on their tap fee credit, or $1,000 back as a kind of a tap fee refund, if you will. It took since 2013 up until last year, we had, I think, 9 total lots out of all the development in Aurora that had taken us up on that. In the last year, we've had about 150. So it's really starting to be adopted by the development community. So I think the development community is understanding that new residents will not only tolerate this, but they want it. And they're starting to go ahead and put it into communities. So that's been very exciting for us to see.
Awesome, thank you. So this question, Paul Fanning said, this is a question for Julie. How long did it take to implement the Envision network process?
The Envision network process on the Big Dry, that project started in, they started the Envision verification during the design phase and completed it at the tail end of construction. Total time on that project was 3 years or more. So 3 years or more, ongoing effort, round numbers.
Sarah, do you have any timeline information also? Perhaps you could jump into.
Sure. The Envision Framework, as I mentioned, can be started at any phase of the project. So it kind of depends on how long the project takes. If you start it in pre-design, and it's a couple years of construction, then it could take 3 or 4 years. If you're trying to start later in the process, it would obviously take a shorter amount of time, but it is generally something that does take a commitment and continued work on for multiple years.
Thank you. Okay, this question is from Brian Neff. To what degree, sorry, I just lost it. To what degree are Tim and Julie concerned with the concepts or actual certification addressed by Envision? does Envision present an opportunity for younger professionals who want to get into the infrastructure replacement game?
I'll jump in on that one. I supervise a staff of seven engineers. We are all Envision certified, and we have over 30 Envision sustainability professionals in the city of Westminster of all ages and across all departments. For younger people entering the field of engineering or planning, I think compared to when I went to school, so many more educational opportunities exist to prepare us to better maintain and sustain our infrastructure. I see the younger generation as all over this, and we like to select consultants to help the city. We like it when they are ENVSPs. We are starting to ask our contractors to be ENVSPs. Those who know how to use and assess credits in the system, yeah, so helpful to us.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, where can we find guidance and education on developing water-wise and Envision-based recreation facilities, specifically community swimming pools? So this is for anyone on the panel.
This is Sarah. The ISI website has information about which projects have already been verified. So you could go on there and look to see if there has been an Envision project done for a community swimming pool. I know that one of the projects that they advertise on their site is a playground and park on top of a wastewater treatment facility. So there are some examples out there already of parks that have the Envision certification. So I would start at the ISI website and kind of poke around and see what you can find. I don't know about water-wise though.
Thank you, Sarah. And the last question is more of a comment from Joan Card. Thank you to all here for embracing an expansive definition of water infrastructure. These are important concepts to ingrain in the water community and the general public. Awesome. So does anyone have any closing thoughts on the panel or from Water Education Colorado? If not, I will turn it over to Courtney.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you again to Sarah, Julie, and Tim for sharing all of their knowledge with us. And thank you to all of our listeners for attending. Once again, we will be sending out this recording later next week for everyone. And with that, we are concluding today's webinar. So I hope everyone has a great day.